Welcome to Vanguar, where humans aren't the underdogs. We're the endgame. Enjoy the journey. Acid rain hissed as it collided with the gleaming surfaces of New U Central Square, sliding down holographic billboards that flickered in perpetual malfunction. One ad promised buttery tentacles now. With extra slime, another looped footage of a woman kissing her own clone. The rain sizzled against the synth stone beneath Zach Alaster's palms as he remained still inverted. For 3 days straight, he'd been holding a handstand in the middle of the city's busiest intersection. Muscles that once screamed now murmured in dull rhythmic ache. Pain had become so constant, so familiar, it was practically background noise like the neon buzz or the smell of burnt oil. Pedestrians flowed around him, a murmuring river of boots, hover scooters, and occasional drifting drones. Most didn't even glance anymore. He was just another freak in a city built by freaks. One teenager flung a half-melted wrap toward him, missing his face by inches. Longer than your last relationship, kid, came a voice inside Zach's head. Dry, judgmental, familiar. His lips twitched slightly. Master Chiron, as the ancient voice called itself, had a gift for these moments. Trapped in the worn ring on Zach's right hand, the essence of a long-dead warrior priest never missed an opportunity to mock or mentor. Or both. Almost done, Zach muttered under his breath, not moving. You said that yesterday and the day before. Your stubbornness would be admirable if it weren't so brain-numbingly idiotic. The rain had long since soaked through Zach's gray tunic. His hair clung to his neck like seaweed. His arms trembled but never collapsed. Not anymore. He'd passed the point of fatigue, gone beyond it, into that strange mental terrain where thoughts blurred and time thinned. A group of office workers stopped a few meters away to take selfies. One of them shouted over the hiss of rain and ambient ads, "Hey freak, how do you pee like that?" Zach didn't answer. He focused inward. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. The breathing technique Chiron had drilled into him was second nature now, as instinctive as blinking. It helped him slow his heart rate, regulate blood flow, quiet the storm inside. And sometimes, just sometimes, it stirred memories. He was 10 again, standing under the blinding lights of the Galactic Youth Auditorium, a gold-trimmed award clutched to his chest. First place quantum cellular mechanics. He'd been the youngest winner in the contest's history. Applause exploded around him, flashes of holo cameras like miniature suns. Later that night, curled on the apartment floor, where his mother liked to watch the city lights, she'd brushed his hair gently and whispered, "You'll always be special, Zach. But being special means you'll never quite fit." Her smile had been warm but edged with sorrow. He hadn't understood it then. But he did now. It was the price of standing apart, of standing alone, of standing on your damn hands in acid rain. A sudden shift in the square's ambient noise pulled him back to the present. Shouting. Movement. A different kind of crowd surge. Zach blinked upside down and saw the wave of people migrating toward the east side of the plaza. Trouble Kieran said, his tone clipped. "Not your concern. Focus on your training." Zach didn't respond right away. "What's happening?" he finally asked. "Public execution. Barbaric as always." "For what?" "An alien researcher. Violated cultural protocols. Something to do with studying human sexuality without a license." Zach wavered. His balance shifted imperceptibly. "That's insane. That's politics. Stay out of it. You're close, Zach. You're finally becoming what I trained you to be. Don't waste it on some misguided burst of morality." But Zach couldn't tune it out. The screaming, the cheers, the slow build of bloodlust that always simmered just beneath civilization's chrome veneer. He knew that sound. He remembered that sound. Another fall, not from a platform but from brilliance. The lab explosion had come without warning, an uncontrolled quantum feedback loop slicing through steel bone and light. Zach hadn't screamed, hadn't had the chance. Just a detonation of everything he was. He'd awakened in a regen tank, his body shredded, spine fused with hardware, mind scrambled. "The prodigy is lost," the doctors had said. Too much damage. The headlines disappeared within a week. Depression came first, then rage, then emptiness. He walked the alleys of New U like a ghost in his own broken body until a forgotten antique shop pulled him inside like gravity. A ring, worn, ancient, whispering on frequencies no one else could hear. When he slipped it on, it felt like a detonation of a different kind, one that didn't break him, but revealed what remained. Well, the voice had said, amused and weary, "You're not what I expected, but I suppose you'll have to do." Now in the middle of the crowd's new hysteria, Zach broke his handstand for the first time in 71 hours. He rolled forward, muscles flowing like silk, landing in a crouch. His arms no longer trembled. His body, once deemed useless, responded with grace beyond biology. He stood. Above the rising mob, holographic screens displayed the face of the condemned. A purple-skinned alien woman, luminous and proud, stared out with eyes the color of forest fire. Her expression wasn't fear. It was curiosity, Kieran Zach murmured. "Don't say it." Her name, Sora Linal, the loudspeaker announced. Solani researcher, guilty of studying human intimacy without authorization. "She's being executed for curiosity," Zach said softly. "And you," Kieran growled, "are about to be executed for heroism." But it was too late. Zach's eyes had locked with hers. And something old and impossible shifted. The hush that fell across New U Central Square was the kind of hush that arrived before the snapping of a guillotine blade, sharp, expectant, a collective breath sucked in and held at the edge of civilization's teeth. Zach's boots pressed into the synth stone as he straightened fully for the first time in nearly 3 days. The acid rain sizzled on his shoulders, running in thin rivers down the creases of his jaw and neck, painting him as some urban war deity risen from the neon mist. Above him, the holographic screens now displayed Sora's face in full detail. Her luminous violet skin shimmered under the harsh execution lights, refracting 1,000 hidden hues, blues like midnight oceans, purples like bruised starlight. Her emerald green eyes, wide and bright, scanned the crowd, not in fear, but in analytical fascination, as though she were watching a data set unfold rather than waiting for her own death. "She doesn't look afraid," Zach murmured, almost to himself. "Because she is beyond that," Kieran replied, voice low and grating in his skull. "Curiosity, the most dangerous fuel in the galaxy." Beneath the screens, the actual Sora was led onto the execution platform. Metal cuffs glowed around her wrists and ankles, humming with containment fields. Even so, she stood impossibly tall, posture straight, head lifted with regal defiance. A standard-issue orange prison jumpsuit clung to her athletic, graceful frame, refusing to hide the alien elegance that seemed to radiate from her core. The official voice boomed from floating drones, slicing through the restless hush. Sora Linal, representative of the Solani Scientific Corps, convicted of violating the Human Cultural Identity Protection Act. Unauthorized research into human intimacy and psychological bonding. Sentenced death by suspension. The phrase alone ignited roars of approval and scattered laughter from the front rows, mostly drunk corporate employees and black market tourists looking for a cheap thrill. A bottle arced through the air, phasing straight through her holographic projection before clanging off the polished gallows floor. Sora's eyes didn't so much as flicker toward it. Instead, her gaze kept moving, sweeping through the restless sea of rain-slick ponchos, translucent umbrellas, biovisor hoods. She watched them as if they were bacteria under a microscope slide. Fascinated, detached, alive. Then for an instant, her gaze found Zach. A thread of something electric sparked through his chest, sudden, involuntary, like a nerve jolted by a misfired current. Her emerald eyes flared minutely, her lips parted, and in that micro-expression, Zach read it: recognition. Not personal, but deeper. A recognition of what he was, a data point she hadn't anticipated. "Focus," Kieran snapped in his mind as if slamming a war drum. "You do not belong in this narrative. Your path is beyond." "Shut up," Zach hissed, his knuckles flexing. His breathing technique kicked in automatically, 4 counts and 7 hold 8 out. But this time, it wasn't enough to quiet the storm. Memories ruptured inside him. Memories he had forced into neat labeled boxes long ago. The sterile lab. The smell of overheated superconductors. Professor Mercer's cold eyes as he watched the chamber overload his hands still on the console. The last words before the blast. "You're too dangerous to exist among us." Then light. then the annihilating scream, then waking up as the universe's broken toy. Do not do this, Kieran warned, panic creeping into the voice that had never before shown fear. You are the culmination of my 1,000-year waiting. You were chosen because you could go beyond limits, not throw your life into the pit for. For curiosity, Zack said aloud, echoing his own heartbeat. Above the executioner, a tall, expressionless human clad in spotless white checked the tension of the suspension rope. Drones closed in, feeding every detail live to countless systems across the solar grid. Sora's chest rose slowly, her head turning, her gaze catching Zack again, and holding this time fully intentional. And then in a movement so small, no one else might have noticed, she nodded once. Something ancient inside Zack detonated. 1,000 hours of silent rooftop meditation. The infinite repetitions of push-ups on blood-slick concrete, the days spent mastering balance with broken nerves, all of it coiled together like a spring. He rolled his shoulders back. Kieran's voice slammed into his mind, every syllable now edged with dread. Zack, do not move. He took one step forward. Zack, he took another, faster. Then he ran. The crowd gasped, parting like water. Zack's body blurred, each footfall exploding off the ground, acid rain splashing in sprays of phosphorescent drops behind him. People shrieked, some tried to grab him, but he moved too fast, slipping between them like a breath through frost. The first guard raised his baton, but Zack barely shifted the baton-sliced empty air as Zack vanished around it, a ghost in a glitching simulation. He neared the gallows. The executioner saw him too late, fumbling for a command panel. Sora stood still, eyes locked on Zack, her lips moving in silent calculation. Time thickened, stretching like melting glass. Zack's heartbeat slowed to a singular tectonic thud. In his mind, Kron screamed a final desperate command, but Zack ignored it, tearing through the last meters in a single inhuman leap. Zack's feet left the ground like a war cry given physical form. In that frozen instant, every droplet of acid rain seemed to hang midair, like glass beads suspended by a cosmic puppeteer. The roar of the crowd warped into a single muffled echo in his skull. The voice of Kieran thundered inside him, wild, desperate, echoing like a dying star. This is your end, boy. You throw it all away for a momentary spark. But Zack wasn't listening. His eyes locked on the purple-skinned alien above the execution platform, now looming like a cruel altar. He felt his heartbeat reduced to a glacial pulse, each thud an eternity between worlds. He twisted in midair, using the rotational force from his leap to bring his left leg forward, landing softly and possibly on the gallows railing. The momentum bent the polished metal under his foot, but he pivoted perfectly, a dancer on a razor's edge. Below, the executioner fumbled with the control panel, mouth wide open in a silent scream. Guards lunged upward, too slow, each movement like molasses under a microscope. With one fluid motion, Zack reached down to his ankle, pulling free the small training knife he kept hidden there. A blade never meant for combat, only for precision. He clenched it between his teeth, freeing both hands as he launched forward again. The rope glowed under the execution lights, an industrial-grade suspension cord designed to hold hundreds of kilos without fail. Zack's mind mapped every fiber, every microscopic vibration in the humid air. Time stopped. Not literally, not yet, but to Zack it might as well have. He soared past Sora as the platform dropped beneath her feet. For a single instant, their eyes met at the apex of her fall. Her emerald irises dilated, reading him like an equation she'd been dying to solve. Then, with the knife now in his hand, Zack sliced through the rope. The sound it made wasn't a snap, but a faint whisper, as if the universe itself exhaled in relief. Sora fell into his arms with the force of a meteor strike. The collision knocked them backward, Zack pivoting his hips mid-fall to take the brunt of the impact on the platform's edge. Sparks flew as they rolled and tangled the metal beneath them, screaming in protest. They landed in a tangle of limbs, her violet skin glowing against the soaked gray of his tunic, her hair sweeping over his face like molten silk. She straddled him instinctively, hands on his chest to brace her landing. Around them, the world roared back into normal time. Gasps, screams, a collective surge of panic. Drones zoomed in, capturing every detail in ultra-high definition. Sora stared down at Zack, breathing heavily, her emerald eyes wide with exhilaration and confusion. Then she burst out, voice tinged with musical accent. "You're the handstand human." Zack wheezed out a short, disbelieving laugh beneath her. 3 days, 14 hours. I was timing you. She continued, shaking her head in stunned wonder. Zack grinned up at her, eyeing her. "Guess I'll be your research subject now, huh?" She hissed in frustration, but the sound carried no venom. More like the flustered snarl of a scientist confronted with a data anomaly she couldn't explain. "I was calculating my final respiratory phases before death. You ruined my data set." Before Zack could retort, an explosion of metal and composite rang out nearby. Security drones descended in swarms, red targeting lasers stitching across the gallows. Guards in white exo armor sprinted forward, weapons raised. "Identification confirmed," a drone's robotic voice barked. "Zachary Allister, interference with lawful execution. High-risk fugitive classification initiated." In Zack's mind, Kiran's voice seethed with a molten mix of resignation and dark amusement. "Congratulations, you absolute idiot. Instead of one execution, we now have two." Zack rolled, flipping Sora off him and onto her feet in a single practice motion. He stood beside her, cracking his neck, his smile thin and edged like a blade. "Maybe," he said, glancing at the first guard approaching, "we should run." Sora's eyes darted across the encroaching forces, her violet lips curling. "Running seems prudent." "Running is boring," Zack countered, slipping into a low stance as a guard lunged at him with a stun baton. The guard swung, but Zack wasn't there anymore. In one blurred sequence, Zack shifted his hand, snatching the baton mid-swing, twisting the soldier's wrist backward. The man's own momentum sent him crashing into another guard, helmets clanging like cracked bells. "How," Sora began, but Zack cut her off with a careless flick of the baton over his shoulder. "I'm bored," he said, moving with fluid grace through the next wave of attackers, each motion so precise it seemed choreographed in advance. "Everything's too damn predictable." Two guards went airborne, limbs flailing like discarded marionettes. Another folded at the knees as Zack's fingers tapped a precise nerve cluster in his neck. Sora gaped, caught somewhere between horror and scientific fascination. "Trust me," Zack called to her, offering his hand amid the chaos. Her emerald eyes narrowed, analyzing him even now. "I have exactly 0 reasons to do so." "But you will anyway," Zack replied with that feral grin. "Because you're curious." She hesitated for a heartbeat, then with a resigned sigh took his hand. "Scientifically fascinating," she muttered. "That's my favorite review so far," Zack said, pulling her toward the edge of the gallows. Behind them, drones screamed warnings, guards roared commands, and the platform shuddered under the impact of the chaos Zack had ignited with a single cut. As they leapt off the gallows together into a future neither of them could predict, Zack felt something crackle through his veins. Possibility, danger, and the heady thrill of doing exactly the wrong thing at exactly the right time. The moment Zack's boots hit the rain-slick pavement, he didn't stop moving. His grip on Sora's hand was firm, but fluid, like a current guiding a stray fish through rapids. Acid rain spattered around them in glowing rivulets, lighting up the dark alleys with chemical sparks. Behind them, alarms wailed like mechanical banshees. Drones zipped overhead, scanning the maze of neon-lit rooftops and holographic signage. Guards thundered across the plaza, their boots smashing into puddles that reflected stuttering ads for cloned pets and AI-fueled soul massages. Sora stumbled at first, her newly freed muscles struggling to match Zack's impossible cadence. But she recovered quickly, her Solani physiology adapting in real-time, breath coming in sharp but steady bursts. "Where?" she gasped, ducking under a low-hanging pipe. "Where are we going?" Zack didn't bother answering. Instead, he vaulted up a narrow wall, his fingers finding micro-edges invisible to the naked eye. With a single explosive push, he hauled himself onto a service platform 2 stories above, yanking Sora up after him as if she weighed nothing. She landed beside him, nearly slipping on the slick metal, but his arms shot out, steadying her. For a heartbeat, their faces hovered inches apart, rain cascading between them, neon reflections dancing in her wide emerald eyes. "New research topic, human disregard for gravitational constraints," she panted. "Don't forget the psychological implications of impulse control." Zack shot back with a crooked grin before spinning around and sprinting across the platform's edge. They burst through a broken security door into an abandoned factory space, enormous skeletal, echoing with the ghostly hum of long disconnected machinery. Overhead flickering warehouse lights sputtered like dying stars. Sora's gaze darted around her scientist mind, already dissecting every surface, every possible exit. But before she could voice her calculations, Zack bolted toward the far wall, not toward a door or a window, but the solid, seamless concrete. Wait, that's... she started, but he didn't hesitate. As she watched in wide-eyed horror, Zack blurred at the last instant, his form shimmering like heat waves over a desert. He didn't crash into the wall. He passed through it. Sora stumbled forward, hand outstretched, mouth agape. On the other side of the wall, Zack appeared on a narrow ledge high above the city streets, his outline refracting like liquid crystal. He turned, tilting his head with a casual smirk. "Coming," he called, as if inviting her to a casual stroll. Her jaw clenched. She sprinted forward, leaping through the same wall, or rather through a microscopic web of atomic gaps that her mind could barely comprehend even as she moved. On the other side, she collapsed against the ledge beside him, gasping. He laughed, a wild, boyish sound that rang against the night's electric pulse. "Shadow step," he explained, gesturing with a lazy wave. "Find the shadows between particles, move through them. It's all just geometry." "That's not physics," she sputtered between breaths, her hands braced against the ledge. "Tell that to physics," Zack shot back, eyes gleaming like polished steel. Below them, a sea of security drones crisscrossed the lower rooftop, scanning futile. A few guards pointed up, but none dared follow onto the perilous high ledges where Zack stood as easily as a cat on a windowsill. Sora's mind whirled, her empathic senses flaring uncontrollably now that they were so close. She could feel his consciousness like a river of electricity under his skin, but beyond that, something else. Another presence, older, sharper, woven into his neural pattern like a second heartbeat. "You're not alone," she breathed, suddenly realizing. "There's someone else inside you." Zack's eyes flickered. His grin faltered, replaced by something harder, sadder. "Ah, you noticed." Sora's fingers curled into the slick metal as she steadied herself. "I can sense it. The second consciousness, so intertwined, so disciplined. That's why your movements are beyond human scope." "Who or what is it?" In his mind, Karan's voice snarled, "Say nothing." But Zack ignored the echo, exhaling as if shedding a 1,000-year weight. "His name is Kiran, a warrior from an ancient epic preserved in this ring," he said, tapping the worn metal on his finger. "He's been stuck in my head for 7 years, training me, fixing me, breaking me. All of the above." Sora's emerald eyes glowed with furious curiosity. "That's impossible. A transcorporeal consciousness embedded in a wearable relic, the neurological compatibility alone." "Yeah, it's impossible," Zack interrupted, shrugging. "But so is everything fun." The roar of approaching hover skimmers broke the fragile moment. Sora glanced over her shoulder, eyes narrowing, as a fresh squadron of drones rose from lower decks, their bright scanning beams slicing through the rain. Zack's expression sharpened. His spine straightened, breath-slowing eyes dilating to absorb every micro-motion around them. "Time to move." Sora touched his arm instinctively. The contact jolted them both, an electric surge through their joined skin. She gasped, her empathic senses overloaded by the depth of his layered emotions: humor, sorrow, rage, boundless defiance. "You're terrified," she whispered, "not of them, of losing him." Zack didn't meet her eyes. His jaw clenched, rainwater streaming down his face, mingling with something that might have been tears. "He's fading," Zack finally admitted, his voice almost lost to the rain. "Kiran's energy is tied to me, but I can't hold him much longer." Before she could respond, Zack's head snapped up, eyes sharpening into razor focus. "We go now." He grabbed her hand again this time, not just as an escape maneuver, but as a lifeline. Together they vaulted from the ledge into the night, free-falling between neon signs and hanging petals, Sora screaming half in fear, half in exhilaration. Below them, the city seethed and burned with the pursuit. Above them, the storm wept violet and green through the riot of artificial lights. In that perfect impossible drop, something clicked into place between them. Not just alliance, not just survival, but a shared trajectory, Neither had fully chosen yet. Both were already accelerating towards. They burst into the motel like phantoms, Zack shouldering the cheap composite door so hard it cracked at the hinges. The sign outside still blinked, auto-lodging no questions asked, flickering between green and red like a dying star. Inside the room stank of synth cleaner trying and failing to mask the scent of mold and old blood. A flickering hollow screen on the wall replayed a loop of paid adult content glitching every few seconds. The single bed adjusted its temperature automatically, though no one had asked it to. Zack didn't stop. He swept the room in seconds, his eyes darting across corners, checking for hidden drones, microcams, traps. His motions were so fluid they looked rehearsed each step and scan, like choreography he'd done 1,000 times in an invisible dance. Sora leaned against the wall panting. Her violet skin glowed faintly from exertion, rainwater dripping from her hair onto the cheap tile floor. She watched him move, her emerald eyes dissecting every line of muscle, every subtle shift. "You're methodical," she finally managed between breaths. "Like a predator or a machine." "Compliments will get you everywhere," Zack shot back dryly, finishing his final sweep and pulling a broken chair into the center of the room. He collapsed into it, stretching his legs, ignoring the wetness soaking into the synthetic cushion. Sora's gaze darted down to the ring on his finger, her brows furrowed. "The consciousness inside you, Kieran. He's not just a guide, he's more." Zack tilted his head, rain still dripping off the end of his chin. "Perceptive, dangerous." She stepped forward cautiously. "I can sense two separate yet intertwined neural patterns when I'm close. One is you, bright, chaotic, reckless. The other is older, disciplined, almost mournful, like a ghost of a war that never ended." He laughed, but it was a brittle sound that cut off almost immediately. "Ghost is one word for it. Parasite, mentor, father figure, drill sergeant, pick your poison." Sora crossed her arms, still studying him as though he were a particularly fascinating lab experiment. "And you let him stay." Zack's jaw flexed. "He didn't give me much of a choice at first, but over time I realized he wasn't just living in me. He was teaching me to live in ways I didn't think possible." Sora hesitated, then moved to sit at the edge of the bed, her posture elegant despite the grimy surroundings. Her fingers curled into the mattress unconsciously, as though she were bracing herself for impact. "Tell me," she said, "all of it." Zack's eyes narrowed, his breath hitching. "Why do you care?" "Because," she replied softly, her voice like a chord struck on a distant string. "Understanding a subject requires understanding its deepest traumas. You are more data than I've ever seen." Zack looked away, his eyes flicking to the cracked ceiling, where a damp stain resembled a bleeding star. Memories surged up hot and jagged. "It was Mercer," he said, finally, his voice low and rough. "My mentor, the one who said I'd change the world. I believed him. Hell, I worshipped him." His fingers curled, nails digging into the armrest. "The day of the explosion, I saw the anomaly in the quantum chamber readings. I warned him, begged him to shut it down. He looked at me like I was a rabid dog, said I was too dangerous to exist among the rest of humanity." Sora's eyes widened, horror blooming across her face. Then he stepped back, let the system overload, watched me break. Zack's voice faltered, his breath shuddering. "I woke up weeks later, half my spine replaced mind, scrambled every headline calling me a cautionary tale. The genius turned invalid." Sora's hand shot to her mouth, fingers trembling. After that, Zack continued, his voice going flat. "I wandered, looking for pain to replace the numbness. Found the ring in a dusty antique shop nobody else remembered. It called to me, or maybe I called to it. Doesn't matter now." In the silence that followed, Karan's presence in Zack's mind shifted. A rare, gentle wave, the same presence that had sometimes offered him a flicker of fatherly softness in the dead of night. Sora stood abruptly, crossing to him in 2 quick steps. Without asking, she reached out and touched the side of his face. Her thumb traced the hard line of his jaw over scars that no regen tank had ever fully healed. "You're not just a data point," she whispered. "You're an entire thesis no one dared to write." Zack's eyes flicked to hers, the storm in his gaze momentarily quieted. "Careful," he warned, his voice low. "You're getting dangerously close to empathy." She snorted a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. I'm a Solani. We're engineered for empathy, remember. Their faces hovered close breaths, tangling. But before the moment could slip further into something neither of them were prepared to label, an electronic hiss cut through the room. Zach's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. They're here. Sora's head whipped around, nostrils flaring. Already. Suppression team, Zach confirmed, standing. 12, maybe more. Heavy weaponry, gas in the vents. Sora froze, her emerald eyes wide with terror. Don't move, Zach ordered sharply. He lunged toward her, covering her mouth with his hand just as her panicked cry started to escape. He leaned close, his forehead nearly touching hers. Trust me, he whispered. She nodded, her pupils dilating, her body trembling against his. Outside, the neon city pulsed and howled. Inside, time seemed to coil inward every second, heavy with unspoken things, rage, betrayal, fragile connection. And through it all, one certainty rang clear in Zach's mind. The impossible was no longer a destination. It was the only path left. The hiss from the vent turned into a low growl, like a dragon waking in the bowels of the building. A thin mist poured into the room, creeping across the cracked tiles, curling around their ankles like a ghostly tide. Zach's mind snapped into that hyper-focused state. Everything slowed, each molecule of gas visible in his sharpened perception. He yanked Sora tighter against him, his hand still clamped over her mouth to stop her instinctive scream. Northwest corner, 4th floor, 3rd window from the left, Kieran's voice echoed in his skull, clipped and precise. Understood, Zach replied internally, his eyes scanning as if he could see through concrete. Sora's eyes were wide, the white stark against her violet skin. Her hands clenched around Zach's forearm, her breath hot against his palm. She trembled not from fear of death, but from the shock of realizing she was no longer in control of any variable in this experiment. In one seamless motion, Zach scooped her into his arms, her slight frame curling against his chest. Without a word, he bolted toward the far wall, the one that looked most solid, most impossible. Her eyes widened in renewed horror. No, she tried to protest, but her voice was muffled. Zach didn't slow, he accelerated. At the last instant, Sora buried her face against his neck. The wall shimmered around them like rippling water, and they passed through particles, parting like a curtain drawn for an audience of ghosts. They emerged into freezing dawn air on a narrow ledge 4 stories above the neon streets. The city spread beneath them, a labyrinth of light and vapor and acid rain, alive with sirens and echoing alarms. Zach shifted his balance effortlessly, toes gripping the slick surface as though he were born in free fall. Sora clung to him, her nails digging into his shoulder as she dared to peek down. Shadow step, Zach muttered as if reminding himself. That's not science, she gasped. Then your science needs new chapters. He shot back with a grin, stepping lightly sideways as searchlights from patrol skimmers cut through the fog around them. Below, the streets writhed with armored guards and prowling drones. Their lights combed the alleys, slicing through shadows like scalpels. The entire district pulsed with the restless heartbeat of a city on lockdown. We need to move, Sora urged, her voice low, her breath still ragged. Zach glanced down at her, their eyes meeting in the dark. We're going to jump, he said simply. Her pupils contracted. That's 15 meters down. He smirked. Correction, it's exactly 14.7 meters down to the first rooftop, but who's counting? She opened her mouth to argue, to analyze, to scream, but never got the chance. Zach leapt. They fell together through violet rain and golden neon, the city's electronic breath rushing past them like a hurricane. Sora's scream was lost in the wind, her hands tightening around his neck. Zach twisted midair, rolling his body to cushion their landing. They smashed onto the lower rooftop, his knees absorbing the impact like living shock absorbers. Sora tumbled forward, but Zach caught her wrist before she slid off the edge. She sprawled against him, gasping hair plastered to her face. Their eyes met closer than breath. Still alive, Zach panted, his grin wicked and feral. Not for lack of trying to die, she shot back, coughing. Good, he said, helping her upright. I like your survival instinct. A screech overhead, a patrol drone sliced down toward them, guns unfolding from its carapace. Zach's fingers twitched. With a flick, he snapped a piece of loose pipe from the rooftop floor. In one impossible motion, he hurled it. The metal bar spun in a perfect arc, striking the drone dead center, knocking it sideways into a support antenna. Sparks burst into the night sky like a dying firework. How did Sora began, but Zack was already moving again, scanning the edge of the next rooftop. "You asked too many questions," he called, gripping her hand and sprinting forward. They crossed a narrow service bridge, a thin steel beam only inches wide. Below them, acid rain dripped into abyssal alleyways, sizzling on old metal like a chorus of whispering snakes. Halfway across, Sora stumbled, slipping toward the drop. Zack's hand snapped out, seizing her wrist and yanking her back into balance. For a second, she just hung there, eyes wide mouth open in shock. "You okay?" he asked, voice calm but his jaw clenched. Her answer came slowly, as if forced through a jammed translator. I don't understand how any of this." Zack leaned in close, his breath brushing her ear. "I stopped waiting for permission to exist." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her fingers twitched against his grip, her body tensing, but she didn't pull away. They reached the far edge of the rooftop, crouching low behind an exhaust vent. Zack scanned the skyline. Beyond the neon towers, a sleek shadow hovered, a private spaceport, its landing pads blinking faintly in the acidic rain. "There," Zack said, his voice low. "That's our ride off this rock." Sora stared at the distant glow, her mind working at quantum speed. "Even if we reach it, we need clearance codes, a ship fuel." "Details," Zack said, smirking. "I'm an improviser." A beat passed. Then, unbelievably, Sora started laughing, a low, shaky sound that turned into a bright, wild note echoing across the rooftop. "Scientifically fascinating," she breathed, wiping rain from her face. He looked at her, momentarily stunned. Then he grinned, all teeth and reckless light. "Best review I've gotten yet." Above them, sirens converged, searchlights, narrowing like the jaws of a cosmic predator. Sora turned to him, her expression suddenly steady, eyes blazing. "Then let's run your experiment, human." Their hands locked again, tighter this time, not just to flee, but because they had no other direction left. And in that instant, as they launched into the neon night together, Zack knew this wasn't just escape. It was the start of an impossible trajectory neither science nor war nor ancient ghosts could contain. The smuggler ship roared to life under Zack's hands, shuddering violently as acid rain pelted its scorched hull. Sparks sputtered from half-fixed conduits, and the control panel flickered in and out like an old nightclub sign. Sora sat in the co-pilot's chair, her violet fingers dancing across an alien interface she'd somehow hijacked in seconds. Every time she brushed a control, the ship hummed in resonance with her bioelectric signature. "How did you learn to fly this thing so fast?" Zack demanded, twisting wires together with his teeth and fingers, as if it were second nature. "Solani diplomatic protocols," she answered without looking up. "Every heir must master 3 disciplines: diplomacy, martial form, and technical infiltration." He let out a low whistle, giving her a side eye. "I only had to learn to stand on my hands in acid rain." She snorted, a quick, bright sound that somehow made the chaos feel almost intimate. Above them, defense drones shrieked as they closed in. Railgun turrets rotated on nearby towers, locking onto the ship's flickering heat signature. "Get ready for jump," Zack growled, slamming the last cable into place. Sora punched coordinates into the nav system, her eyes narrowing. "I've uploaded the planetary approach vector. Once we break orbit, the system will lock us into the crystal corridor." Zack froze mid-motion, his head whipping around. "Crystal corridor? You mean Nexus Prime?" She nodded, once her emerald eyes steady. "Nexus Prime, the sanctuary world of my people, the birthplace of cosmic understanding." Zack's fingers tightened on the flight stick. The thrusters roared and they shot skyward, a sudden comet tearing through the acid clouds. "What the hell are we doing there?" he shouted over the rising alarms. Sora's voice dropped low, almost reverent. "There's a temple hidden within the crystalline core, the temple of soul binding. My ancestors used it to merge consciousness, to transfer entire essences across bodies and dimensions." He stared at her, thunderstruck. "You're talking about saving Quran?" Her gaze locked onto his, shimmering with a fierce vulnerability he'd never seen before. "Yes, the ring is decaying. Your bond with Kiran won't last much longer. But at the temple, what then? We can give him physical form again?" permanently. Before Zack could process the surge of emotions, the ship shuddered violently. A railgun slug clipped the aft stabilizer, spinning them sideways. Warning klaxons howled, interior lights flickering blood red. "Hold on!" he roared, jerking the flight stick. The ship tumbled through the upper atmosphere, clouds streaking past like radioactive waterfalls. Sora clung to her seat, her hair whipping around her face like silver flame. Through the cockpit glass, a shimmering blue corridor began to open its edges, refracting light into impossible prismatic shapes, as if the universe itself were tearing open an eye just for them. Sora's fingers flew over the controls, aligning resonance signature. The corridor only accepts those who aren't driven by violent intent. Zack's laugh was wild, sharp, alive. "Good thing I'm too bored to be angry." With a final convulsive jerk, the ship slammed forward and disappeared into the corridor. The interior of the crystalline tunnel was nothing like conventional hyperspace. It felt alive. Pulsing energy waves rolled along the ship's hull, whispering in languages Zack's neurons could almost understand but never translate. He felt Kieran's presence surge within him, stronger than it had been in days. The old warrior's voice was a low rumble, now laced with awe. "I recognize this place. I thought it was legend." Zack breathed, his eyes wide. "Hang on, old man. We're getting you a new set of legs." Sora turned to him, her expression now somber. "There's more. The ritual requires two living anchors. The stronger the emotional bond, the more stable the transfer." Zack's throat tightened. "Meaning?" She swallowed hard. "Meaning, we can't just be physically present. We have to be united, spiritually, physically, emotionally." He blinked, trying to form a snarky comeback, but nothing came. He could only stare at her, all the flippant jokes crashing into the reality of the moment. She looked away, violet skin darkening in a deep salami blush. "If we fail, Kieran will be lost forever, and you might not survive." Zack exhaled slowly, the words scraping raw against his chest. He turned away from the controls, reaching for her hand. "You sure about this?" he asked, voice low. Her emerald eyes met his. "You're the only variable I can't predict," she whispered, "and the only one I want to try." Silence wrapped around them, thicker than vacuum. Then with sudden urgency, the crystalline corridor spat them out above a world that shimmered like a living jewel. Nexus Prime. The planet unfolded beneath them, a vast crystalline sphere refracting the galaxy's light into infinite rainbows. Gleaming spires twisted from the surface like frozen lightning bolts, each reflecting fragments of stars. As the ship coasted into orbit, Zack felt the ring on his finger pulse weakly. He glanced down, seeing a flicker of faint light. "We're here," Kieran rasped, so faint now, Zack felt it more as a vibration than a voice. Sora reached for the final approach vector. "Prepare for descent. Once we enter the core, there's no turning back." Zack squeezed her hand tighter, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I was never any good at turning back," he said, his voice somewhere between a laugh and a vow. She laughed softly, a clear, sharp sound that echoed in the cockpit like a chime struck in zero gravity. As they plunged toward the crystalline gates, their fate blazing ahead like a cosmic dare, neither of them looked away. The ship sliced through Nexus Prime's crystalline atmosphere like a spear hurled by a forgotten god. Electrostatic arcs flared along its hull, illuminating the cockpit in jagged pulses. Zack and Sora braced as the vessel spiraled downward, guided by an invisible intelligence that felt older than the stars themselves. The crystalline surface parted before them like liquid light, forming a shimmering tunnel that spiraled into the heart of the planet. As they entered, Zack felt something brush across his consciousness, a cosmic curiosity, an ancient welcome laced with warnings. Sora's hands moved across the controls with effortless precision, her face locked in an expression of reverent focus. "We're inside," she murmured. "The planetary consciousness is guiding us to the temple core." Zack's gaze darted to her, then down to the ring on his finger. The glow there was weaker than ever, barely pulsing. He could feel Kieran's essence flickering like a candle in a typhoon. "My time is ending," Kieran's voice rasped in his mind, thin and scattered. "You must be ready to let me go." Zack clenched his jaw. "We didn't come all this way to let you die," he growled under his breath. As if in response, the ship descended into a vast subterranean chamber, an impossible space suspended in an endless void. its geometry folding in on itself. Crystalline walkways branched like veins connecting impossible angles that defied all known physics. At the center floated the Temple of Soul Binding. It looked alive. Crystalline spires twisted and curled their surfaces, shifting with memories instead of reflections. Ghostly silhouettes moved inside the walls, echoes of past rituals of long-forgotten ancestors whispering through time. Sora rose from her seat, her violet skin shimmering with internal light. She turned to Zack, her eyes luminous and vulnerable. Once we enter the temple, we'll sense everything, every thought, every fear. There will be no barriers left. Good, Zack replied, simply standing and stepping forward until their faces were inches apart. I'm tired of barriers. A tremor ran through her, her breath catching. She nodded once, then moved to the docking console, her hands dancing through final sequences. The ship docked seamlessly with a floating crystalline platform. As the hatch hissed open, Zack stepped out, first his boots touching a surface that felt less like solid ground and more like walking across condensed light. Sora followed her fingers, brushing the temple walls as they moved deeper into the main chamber. Each touch sent waves of bioluminescent ripples across the surface, echoing their presence like a heartbeat. They reached the central ritual basin, a shallow pool of liquid crystal that shimmered with shifting cosmic constellations. Above it, the air vibrated with silent chants, an otherworldly choir that wrapped around Zack's soul like an electric cocoon. Sora turned to him, trembling now. We must merge, she whispered. Body, mind, essence. Only then can Kieran be anchored to a new form. Zack stared at her, his heart pounding like a war drum. And what about us? What happens after? She swallowed hard, her eyes softening. Solani bonding rituals are eternal. Once connected, our essences can never fully separate. Silence fell heavy and electric. Then Zack let out a short, breathless laugh. Screw it, he said, stepping forward. We already passed every other exit sign. Without another word, he cupped her face, pulling her into a kiss that ignited like a starburst. Her fingers clawed into his hair, her entire body pressing against him, as if trying to memorize every contour of his soul. Their connection deepened instantly. No gradual blooming, just a raw collision of worlds. Zack felt her memories flood into him. Her exile training, the humiliating betrayal by Dominic, the endless hours of loneliness on alien diplomatic missions. And she felt him, the lab explosion, Mercer's cold betrayal, the years of physical agony and mental collapse, the searing burn of finding Quran and rising from the ashes. The crystalline basin pulsed liquid light, rising and wrapping around them like living vines. Zack's scars lit up, glowing through his skin, while Sora's violet skin turned translucent, showing swirling patterns of starlight beneath. Somewhere in the cosmic maelstrom, Kieran's presence expanded, filling Zack's mind until it felt like an ocean inside his skull. My son, Kieran's voice came no longer just a mental echo, but a full resonant roar. You have surpassed every boundary. I am proud. Zack's voice cracked, his hands tightening on Sora's waist. Not done yet, old man. The basin erupted upward in a fountain of energy. From it, a humanoid shape began to coalesce, broad-shouldered, luminescent markings spiraling across obsidian skin. Kieran's new form solidified, his eyes glowing with a feral light that mirrored the temple's eternal flame. Sora pulled back from Zack, eyes wide, her lips trembling. But before she could speak, the chamber trembled violently. Sirens blared, crystalline walls flickering. A massive breach opened at the entrance. Dominic stepped through, flanked by armored Institute soldiers. His white uniform gleamed, his eyes as cold as the vacuum of space. Fascinating, Dominic sneered, raising a shimmering weapon that crackled with Solani energy. A bonding ritual and an attempted resurrection. You really have no concept of restraint, Zack. Zack pulled Sora behind him, his hand igniting with swirling energy, drawn straight from the temple floor. Dominic, he spat, voice low and venomous. Always knew you'd show up for the encore. Kieran stepped forward, his new form unstable but radiating lethal presence. I will handle them, he thundered, his voice echoing like war drums across centuries. Dominic smirked, raising the alien disruptor. I came prepared, he purred and fired. Kieran lunged forward, intercepting the blast with his bare hands, his entire form shuddering cracks of energy spiderwebbing across his chest. In that instant, everything slowed. Zack felt Sora's fingers slip into his, their bond solidify beyond words. Karan turned his head slightly, his face a mosaic of pain and unwavering pride. Remember the final lesson, Kieran whispered directly into Zack's soul, the point of silence. And then with a shattering roar, Kieran leapt forward, his form dissolving in a storm of luminous shards that shielded Zack and Sora from Dominic's second shot. Time stood still, and Zack knew the final technique had awoken. The instant Kieran's luminous shards shielded them, Zack felt the rush a thunderclap in his veins, as if every cell in his body screamed and roared at once. Time convulsed. Dominic's soldiers crashed into the chamber, their steps echoing in distorted waves. Each movement hung in the air like an oil painting melting under a torch. Sora clung to Zack's arm, her breath ragged. Her emerald eyes flickered with terror and resolve all at once. "Zack," she gasped. "What? What did he mean, point of silence?" Zack closed his eyes for a heartbeat, his entire consciousness lighting up with Kieran's final memory, the ultimate technique, the cost no one sane would ever pay. He saw himself years ago standing in their safe house rain tapping against cracked glass. Karan's spectral form had loomed over him, eyes heavy with truths too sharp to speak aloud. "There is a final art," Kieran had told him, voice low. "A technique that allows you to step beyond time to stop its flow for 10 heartbeats. But the price," Zack remembered replying cocky and defiant. "What price?" Kieran had turned face lost in shadow. "Your future. Each heartbeat consumes a piece of your life that cannot be regained. Use it once and you will never be the same. Use it twice, you may cease to exist altogether." Now as Dominic raised his shimmering disruptor weapon again, Zack felt those 10 heartbeats echo deep inside him, resonating like funeral bells. His fingers slipped from Sora's, sliding along her cheek, memorizing the warmth. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice a mix of apology and promise. "Zack," she screamed, reaching for him, but he was already gone. In that moment, Zack stepped beyond time. The universe froze. Dominic's snarl twisted in midair, stuck halfway between fury and triumph. The soldiers behind him looked like statues' weapons poised mid-swing. Energy bolts hung in the air, frozen raindrops of light. So Zack moved through it all like a ghost wearing human skin. Each step felt heavy, each breath a thunderclap threatening to shatter him from the inside out. His nose started bleeding immediately, a thin crimson thread that drifted like a tiny comet. One heartbeat. He dashed to the first row of soldiers, disarming them with micro-precise strikes, fingers brushing nerve clusters. Their knees buckled, their weapons dropped in midair, but they would not fall until time resumed. 2 heartbeats. He snapped Dominic's weapon apart in a blur, scattering its pieces like stardust across the crystalline floor. 3 heartbeats. He touched Sora's face again, kissing her frozen lips with infinite tenderness, a moment that transcended the fight around them. 4 heartbeats. He rewired the temple control panel, activating the emergency evacuation platform beneath the ritual basin. 5 heartbeats. He stepped behind Dominic, a whisper of movement that even Kieran in his prime might have missed. 6 heartbeats. He placed a hand against Dominic's armored chest, feeling the heartbeat locked in stasis. Zack's own pulse thundered, echoing the cost. 7 heartbeats. He whispered into Dominic's ear, "History doesn't belong to cowards." 8 heartbeats. He cleared the soldiers' final barricade, resetting their weapons to safety mode with flicks that defied all known physics. 9 heartbeats. He returned to Sora's side, sliding his fingers back into hers, anchoring himself to her warmth before the world came crashing back. 10 heartbeats. He exhaled. Time snapped like a glass whip. The soldiers collapsed all at once, their bodies striking the floor in a synchronized crash. Dominic staggered forward, his weapon gone, his eyes wild with incomprehension. "What did you do?" Dominic shrieked, spittle flying as he reached for a phantom weapon no longer there. Zack's chest heaved, blood trickling from his eyes and ears now. His legs nearly gave out, but Sora held him upright with trembling strength. Dominic lunged, rage exploding in his veins, but Zack caught him by the collar, eyes boring into his soul. "You wanted to erase stories," Zack hissed, voice low and primal. "But stories always find a way." With a final surge, Zack hurled Dominic into the center of the ritual basin. The crystal liquid swallowed him, turning black as his form dissolved into flickering shards. His scream twisted into an echo that the universe itself refused to keep. Sora stared at Zack, horror and awe mixing in her glowing eyes. You used it, the point of silence. He nodded weakly, sinking to his knees. Worth it, he choked out. For you, for Kieran, for all of it. She dropped beside him, her hands cupping his cheeks. But your body, it's already different, Zack gasped. He could feel it, the irrevocable changes, the burned-out nerve paths, the shifting patterns in his cells. He wasn't entirely human anymore. Maybe he never had been. Behind them, the evacuation platform began to rise, crystalline walls closing around the chamber, sealing them off from the collapsing temple above. Sora pulled him closer, tears streaking down her violet cheeks, her forehead pressing into his. I felt everything, she whispered, voice trembling. Every choice, every pain. You didn't just save me. You chose me. Zack gave a ragged laugh, coughing up a small fleck of blood. Had to make the data interesting for your thesis, he teased weakly. She let out a shaky laugh that broke into a sob, wrapping her arms around him, holding him as if she could anchor his unraveling existence with sheer force of will. Above the temple began to shatter light, cascading downward like a dying supernova. But inside their tiny crystalline cocoon, there was only the warmth of shared breath and the hum of a future that no longer belonged to destiny, but to them alone. The crystalline evacuation platform plunged deeper into the core of Nexus Prime, far below the shattering temple. Outside, shards of the ancient structure fell in silent brilliance like a sky of dying stars frozen mid-collapse. Sora held Zack tightly against her, her violet skin shimmering with soft bioluminescence that pulsed in rhythm with his ragged breathing. The hum of the descending platform echoed like a distant heartbeat, the only sound anchoring them in the chaos. Stay with me, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please don't leave me now. Zack's head lolled against her shoulder, his eyes half-lidded but still burning with that irreverent spark. He managed a crooked grin, blood smearing the corner of his mouth. I'm not going anywhere. You're annoyingly stubborn, you know that? Sora let out a choked laugh, her tears mixing with the bioluminescent glow. Says the man who jumps through walls and slices time apart like a cake. He tried to laugh too, but ended up coughing, his body shuddering with the effort. Then slowly he lifted his trembling hand and pressed it to her cheek. You saved me, more than I saved you. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, as if his warmth could seal every fracture in her heart. No, she whispered, we saved each other. The platform shuddered one last time before coming to a gentle stop inside a vast cavern of impossible geometry. Above them, the temple imploded completely, sealing off their old lives in a shimmering funeral of light. In front of them lay a hidden vessel, a Solani escape ship, sleek and organic-looking, its hull shaped like a flowing crystal wave. Ancient markings spiraled along its sides, softly glowing in the cavern's ambient energy. Sora's eyes widened in recognition. The sanctuary vessel, she breathed. Every temple has one, an ark to carry those who bear the future. Zack blinked his gaze, struggling to stay focused. Fancy lifeboat, he slurred. Sora helped him stagger toward the vessel. As they stepped inside, the interior lit up with welcoming pulses, its systems resonating with Sora's presence. She guided Zack gently into a reclining seat, the material conforming to his damaged form, as if embracing him. She moved quickly through the cockpit, activating the core. The crystalline interface shifted, showing a swirl of star lines and infinite branching paths, escape vectors beyond known space. Zack groaned softly, his eyes fluttering open to watch her. Where now? She glanced back at him, her face illuminated by the soft alien glow. A place beyond the charts, she said, her voice steadying. A world hidden from all scans, untouched by the galaxy's wars. My ancestors called it the sanctuary, a final refuge for when all else failed. His lips twitched. So, honeymoon spot. She let out a startled laugh, shaking her head, tears glinting in her lashes. You're incorrigible, she murmured. In his mind, a faint pulse echoed, a single final spark, Kieran's essence now permanently part of him. You did well, my son. The voice came no longer commanding, but warm, almost paternal. I am proud beyond words. A deep peace settled in Zack's chest, weaving through the agony, The exhaustion, the rawness of transformation. He wasn't alone anymore, not truly. Sora turned back to the console, selecting a shimmering pathway that branched away from all recognized jump routes. The Sanctuary. The ship's core pulsed in response, organic systems activating like a heartbeat. As the vessel rose, crystalline tunnels began to collapse behind them, sealing them off from pursuit forever. Outside, the world of Nexus Prime shrank into a pinprick of refracted starlight. Sora moved back to Zack, sliding into the seat beside him, her fingers intertwining with his. "When we land," she said softly, "there will be no more institute, no more council, no more scientists trying to dissect us." He turned his head slowly, smiling despite the pain. "Just you, me, and probably way too many awkward psychological surveys." She giggled through her tears, leaning forward to kiss him gently. "I'll start with the most important question," she whispered against his lips. "What does it feel like to become impossible?" His eyes softened, a faint flicker of that old reckless spark reigniting. "Feels like finally standing on my own feet after spending too long on my hands," he whispered back. Outside, hyperspace folded open, a tunnel of cosmic fractals, kaleidoscopic and alive, inviting them forward. The sanctuary world appeared at the tunnel's end, bathed in serene blue light, untouched and pristine like the dream of a civilization that never learned to break itself. As the ship coasted through the final jump, Zack felt the last pieces of himself settle: the prodigy, the broken genius, the impossible warrior, the new hybrid soul of Kiran, all converging into a singular, defiant heartbeat. Beside him, Sora squeezed his hand tighter, anchoring him to the present, to possibility, to the reckless promise they had built together in the ruins of two broken lives. Their vessel descended toward the untouched world, a final trail of starlight following in its wake. In that luminous echo, if one looked closely, it formed an infinity symbol, a quiet testament to what they had become. As they prepared to step onto new soil, Sora turned to him, her voice trembling but fierce. "Ready to create a future where curiosity isn't a crime." Zack smirked, pushing himself upright despite the agony screaming through every fiber. "Only if we get to break every rule along the way." And with that hand in hand, they stepped into a dawn no chart had ever dared to record their new beginning, etched into the universe, not as a footnote, but as an unstoppable, infinite declaration.